As sports history fans, we often reminisce about the legends. Willis Reed limping onto the NBA Finals court, Kurt Schilling's bloody sock, Kerry Strug's courageous dismount, and so many more. These moments often define sports history. But what about the countless injuries that did not become legends, or careers that were derailed due to inadequate care? That's where this episode's sponsor comes in. Introducing to you, ILP Sports Consultants, your trusted sports injury partner, available 24/7. Brian Maelli at ILP Sports Consultants has over 20 years of experience in the orthopedic and sports medicine industry, and he has worked with athletes across the gamut, from youth to amateurs, professionals, in almost every sport played in the United States of America, accommodating athletes at every stage of their career. This adaptability ensures that ILP services are perfectly tailored to your skill level, no matter where you are in your athletic journey. With ILP, you are in control. Choose the steps that matter most to you. Diagnosis, treatment plan, recovery, or the whole journey. ILP services are tailored to your unique needs. Rushing for care is a common pitfall, leading to future problems. ILP Sports Consultants helps you make the right decisions, ensuring that you receive timely and safe care. And here's a bonus. Brian hosts the Injured List podcast, sharing insights and athlete stories you won't want to miss. Whether you're a concerned parent or grandparent, or an athlete yourself seeking guidance, ILP Sports Consultants is your beacon of hope in sports injury management. Visit ilpsports.com today. That's the letters ilpsports.com. ILP Sports Consultants, where your well-being is the priority and your recovery is the mission. Choose ILP Sports Consultants for a healthier sports journey, helping you get back in the game the smart way.
Blog Talk Radio.
Tonight we'll go back in time to seasons past, when 22 men graced the rugged fields of yesterday, fighting for one more first down, one more yard gain, one final score which would bring victory after 60 minutes of battle on the gridiron. Tonight we'll explore the world of Gridiron Greats. Welcome to Gridiron Greats, football history and its memorabilia on the Gridiron Greats podcasting and publishing network, in conjunction with Swick Enterprise. We're live from the Wallingford, Connecticut home of Gridiron Greats magazine, and I'm Bob Swick, publisher and editor of Gridiron Greats magazine, and I'll be your host for the show. Gridiron Greats is the only publication in America which focuses upon the history and memorabilia of the North American football game since its inception in 1869. We cover 140-plus years of football history and memorabilia. And you can find us on the web at www.gridirongreatsmagazine.com. It's at this time I'd like to introduce my co-host, who's a senior contributing writer to Gridiron Greats magazine, a football memorabilia historian, specializing in pre-World War II items, in particular Red Grange, and also Seattle Seahawk items, in particular Steve Larkin. He hails from Portland, Oregon. Mr. Joe Squires. Joe, welcome to the show.
Captain, you are in rare form today. Your football, enunciation, your salutation was off the charts, sir.
Thank you, Joe.
I'm excited. We got a good guest. We got a good guest today. We got some good topics. I'm excited for today's show, Captain.
Good. And we're going to lead right off in our preliminary discussion. We're going to talk about the upcoming national convention. It's going to be in Rosemont, Illinois, which is right outside of Chicago.
Yep.
And I will be set up again, as usual, with Josh Adams' sports card. I do believe, though, MSB and BSD auctions will not be set up at the show this year because of several different scheduling issues. I know the kids on both sides of the family, the kids have a lot of activities, a lot of sports going on, a lot of tournaments going on, so I don't think they can make it. But we'll see what happens. But I'll be there. I'll be there with Josh, and we'll be set up. And hopefully I'll be seeing many subscribers and many new individuals who are going to be reading Gridiron Greats for the first time.
And speaking of personal life getting in the way of hobby, I'm missing the National this year because a very dear friend of mine is getting married. You guessed it, Saturday, or whatever it is, August 3rd. And it's in Central Oregon, so it's 5 hours from Portland, no airport around. I kicked around going to Chicago like on a Wednesday morning, flying back on a Friday, and it's just one of those where I'm like, I'm making a lot of effort just to go, have some pizza with some friends, So unfortunately, I'll be missing again. I'll be missing this year, Captain.
But next year, don't forget, it will be in Atlantic City. And
is it really? In AC? I didn't know that. Oh,
yeah.
I didn't know it was in AC. Wow.
And then the year after that, I believe it's Cleveland, and then the year after that's back in Rosemont, Chicago area. So I like Atlantic City, obviously.
Yeah, how was that national? I missed that one.
Well, it's a much different crowd, a much different group of not all the national dealers end up going out there because for the West Coast guys, that's a haul to say the least. A lot more East Coast dealers were there, obviously because it's much closer for us to go there, and because of it, you saw a pretty good, selection of East Coast dealers there, to say the least. So, I mean, for me, it was only like a 4.5 hour, not even that much, probably a 4 hour ride from here, so it wasn't bad at all, and it was interesting. It was an interesting show to say the least. But that's next year. This year I'll be in Chicago, so I got to fly out there and lug a bunch of stuff and ship a bunch of stuff out. So the logistics of it are a little more difficult.
One of my favorites. I do like the Chicago Nationals. I think my favorite national was Baltimore. I really loved that setup.
Baltimore was very, very convenient for a lot of people because the way it was set up. I mean, you were right there at the convention center, depending on where you stayed. I mean, those 3-4 hotels right there. And for some reason, I just think Baltimore was laid out better than in Chicago. Chicago seems vast, to say the least. I mean, it's a hike to get around everything and see everything at the show. You know what I mean? So it's a different ball game going there. Cleveland is Cleveland. I think Cleveland is relatively laid out. Unfortunately, it's in the middle of nowhere. So depending on where you stay, you got a challenge to get there and get home every night. And that was my challenge last year, staying downtown Cleveland, although I'm glad I did because I got to see the Browns Stadium and the Little Browns Museum there before the show started. But at the same time, it was a good 45 minutes there and coming home every day from the show.
Oh, wow.
So it was a little different. But it is what it is. It's a national. I'll be very happy to see people I only see once a year and see the Midwest dealers that just go to the Chicago show. It should be an interesting 4 days for me, to say the least.
Yeah.
So,
and I've had a couple people joke around with me where it's like, what kind of friend has his wedding on the weekend of the national? And
well, I didn't want to bring that up, but I was kind of concerning for me that knowing how valuable you are to the hobby and how you look forward to going out there, and then he decides to schedule his wedding just happened to be on Hall of Fame induction weekend and the national convention at the same time. I I kind of would question what I put in the envelope for that couple. That's all I can say. So,
that's a good way to put it. My wife has a friend who had an engagement party on Super Bowl Sunday once. I remember getting the invite. I'm like, sweetie, look at this. That's Super Bowl Sunday. And she's like, oh. Yeah, and my wife's like, oh, I didn't even notice that. I'm like, well, have fun at your friend's, wedding shower. I'm not going to that.
I mean, that's a 48-hour time period in my life where, I mean, there's nothing that occurs other than the Super Bowl, the preparation for the party here or wherever we're going and the like. And wow, that's almost sacrilegious.
That's a myth
to do something like
that. But
anyway,
hey, you told me not to sweat this, but I wanted to give you a shout out. You sent me a really nice little gift package last week, including a Seattle Seahawk 1989 yearbook, and then a printer's uncut sheet of 1963 tops. I just wanted to say thanks. That was very gracious of you. I looked through this 89 Seahawk book, and inside of it, like Brian Bosworth, Steve Largent's last year, Dave Craig. It was just so fun to look through this. It was such a trip through time 30 years ago.
Well, I figured you would enjoy it because, A, it is the last year of Largent, and it was Boz's debacle year there in Seattle. So to me, it's a historical yearbook. And the 63 Tops sheet was one of my picks going antique hunting down here on the shoreline in Connecticut. And I was kind of shocked when I saw it in the display case at this antique co-op place we go to. So I picked it up, and I kept you in the back of my mind. I knew you would enjoy it, so I'm glad. I will
obviously the Seattle Seahawks. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I hopefully will have some reports from the National. We'll see what happens if I can broadcast live there. We'll see. Last time I was there, I had some Wi-Fi issues, so I don't know what will happen. I may end up at the Hilton lobby there doing the show at very late at night, so we'll see what happens. All right, at this time, our special guest is here, and I don't want to waste any more time because I know he has a very busy schedule. I'd like to welcome our special guest to the show tonight. This collection was featured in Gridiron Greats magazine back in our fall 2016 issue, and it's also been displayed at the Professional Football Hall of Fame in Canton, Ohio. He assembled it with Mr. Dan Hunt. It is one of the greatest football card collections ever assembled in our hobby. And I'd like to welcome to our show this evening Mr. Robert Castelling. Robert, thank you for being on.
Oh, you're welcome, guys. Thank you for having me.
We really appreciate you taking time out to talk with us. And I'm going to lead off by asking you, what's your background in collecting as far as football cards is concerned, if you could tell our audience?
Well, I mean, as a kid growing up in the 80s, I never collected cards from the 80s. I was always, buying, cards or finding cards, from the 50s and 60s, a lot of baseball cards as well. And the biggest problem I realized, later in life is, when you handled them and you actually, wanted to read them and were excited about them, you were almost destroying them. So, looking back at some of the early cards I had from the, 60s, 70s, 50s, they're abused, but they're still emotional and sentimental to me. So, I've always had the card collecting bug. It just wasn't fully recognized or realized until I got a little bit older and had a little more money to spend on cards.
So you've been a collector all of your life then?
Oh yeah, I mean I'm in the art business. I at one point early on I assembled the largest collection of Charles Schulz Snoopy artwork in the world, which I ended up selling and donating to the Schulz Museum in Santa Rosa, California.
That's
unbelievable. Wow.
It's funny. This is Joe Squires. Thanks a lot for coming on, by the way, Robert. I really appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks for inviting me, Joe.
Yeah. It's fascinating because if you take a demographic of most collectors, it's that. It's you collected as a kid. Somewhere along high school, you discover girls. you stop collecting, and then somewhere in your late 20s, early 30s, something is a catalyst to get you back into collecting, you know?
Yeah, and I don't know what it was. I think I've always been excited about classics. I mean, my first car was a '66 Chevelle Malibu convertible. Just recently, I spent 3 years building a 1927 Ford Hot Rod, which I put a 32 frame, I put a 48 flathead V8 in it, and I love things that are historic, and I really was always about preserving things for the next generations. And one day I remember, I think I was on eBay, believe it or not, and a 1948 Sid Luckman PSA 8 was offered for sale, and I started doing a little bit of research, and I was like, wow, this is a really rare card. And I thought, it's X amount of dollars, and I thought, wow, it'd be kind of cool to buy maybe 4 or 5 or 6 great cards, football cards, because I'm a little more passionate about football as ever than I ever was in baseball, and I always felt like football cards were a better value. I felt like long term, they may even someday outperform a lot of the baseball cards that people are collecting. So I went about buying the 48 Luckman and a few other ones which I'm happy to talk about later on, and then I guess things got out of control.
So you have the name of your collection is the Hunt Casterline collection. First of all, how do you know Dan Hunt, one of the owners of the Kansas City Chiefs, and then how did that conversation get started to start putting together one of the greatest Hall of Fame rookie card collections in existence?
Well, I mean, it's officially called the Hunt Casterline Pro Football Hall of Fame collection. So we were able to get the Pro Football Hall of Fame in Canton to give us a license designation for the collection forever. So it's kind of nice that they were willing to put their name on this collection. That's how proud of it they were in seeing that it got assembled.
Wow.
The way I met Dan is about 15, 16 years ago. He came into my art gallery in Aspen, Colorado. That was one of my first galleries, and I was doing a lot of limited edition prints by Andy Warhol and a few other artists. And not knowing, it's probably even closer to 20 years now, but let's not get that far back. And he was a lot younger than me. I think Dan's probably about 10 to 12 years younger than me, and he said to me, look, I'm really interested in the Andy Warhol Cowboy and Indian series, and right before Warhol passed away, he did a series of prints with cowboys and Indians. So once again, not knowing his family or who he was, and Google didn't exist, so it was perfect. I could actually get to know somebody for who they were, as opposed to who the media and social media said they were. So, and we started talking. He ended up buying 1 or 2 of the Indian prints, and then about 2 months later, he called me and he said, "Hey, Robert," he says, "I want more of the Warhol Indian prints." And I said, they're okay. I said, but there's better Andy Warhols out there if you're going to invest your money. And anyway, Dan was probably 19 or something at the time, and he said, "Look," he said, "my dad owns the Kansas City Chiefs, and I want to buy them for the offices or for my office or something." And I said to him, well, let's get you everyone that he ever did then. So it was my way of being shut up by him real quick.
So how did that conversation start? You mentioned it's the Pro Football Hall of Fame collection. I mean, obviously, having the last name of Hunt with Kansas City Chiefs in your business card really gets you an introduction to the Hall of Fame. I mean, what's the Hall of Fame's involvement? Is it financial or just support? And then how did the conversation start with Dan Hunt?
Just support. I mean, the thing is, it's funny because someday I'll write a book about it, but Clark Hunt, Dan's brother, was very instrumental because for about 6 or 7 years now, Dan and I have been buying and putting this collection together, really doing it privately. We couldn't really let anybody know what we were trying to accomplish because, number one, prices would have gotten out of control, and 2, a lot of people would choose not to sell for whatever reasons. So we had to keep it private, and about 4 years ago, Clark Hunt, Dan's brother, was at a game. I want to say in Oakland. I just don't quote me on that. And he was there with Joe Horrigan of the Pro Football Hall of Fame, who just retired and probably one of the nicest guys I've ever met, and just a wonderful old school person who I consider a good friend. And Clark said, "Hey, Joe, I think my brother and this guy from Colorado are putting a collection together that seems pretty special, but Clark wasn't even involved." So at the Super Bowl in Arizona, Joe agreed to meet with me and Dan, and I literally printed out most of the cards in the collection, or at least had a description of what the collection was entailing. And he was just blown away. He said, "Robert," he said, "what you and Dan have put together is something that's historic. It's something that, ultimately could be priceless, because it most likely won't be able to be put together again for a lot of different reasons, not only financial, a lot of different reasons." And that's when he decided that they wanted to exhibit it in Canton at the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And part of our negotiations, because Dan and I aren't making any money on it, we just asked that they would designate it this collection in case we ever wanted to send it to other museums or schools or any fields, and they, after a little bit of time, agreed.
So you and Dan are sitting around having a beer, talking, looking at this 48 leaf Sid Luckman card, and suddenly he goes, "You know what? We should assemble one of the best football card collections ever put together." I mean, who floated the idea, and who? Yeah, that's what I'm curious about. Is the collaboration. That's fascinating.
Well, I started buying them, the cards, and I started realizing soon. I went through my 5 cards for my kids that turned out to 10 cards, and now we're already getting into the big numbers. And I called Dan up and I said, "Hey, you're sitting down." he said, "Yeah, why?" I said, "Look," I said, "I'm not an actuary, and I'm not the greatest math scholar, but I think, over time and over these big collections were coming up for sale. Like the guy that owned a collection called the Fight for Old DC, he sold his collection off. A lot of these guys were selling their collections.
John Isaacson.
Yeah, and it was right when I started, all these collections were coming available at the right time. And I said, "Look," I said, "if there's a little window for us, it's not going to be inexpensive." I mean, we knew what the costs were. I mean, we have 2 Nagurski 8s that we paid $100,000 a piece for. So, but I paid $50,000 for my Name It's 9. I paid $20,000 for my Staubach 10 and my Bradshaw 10, and these are all the Pro Football Hall of Fame rookie cards. So they were expensive at the time, but now that looks like the biggest bargain I ever got. So
without a doubt.
I said, "Look, it's going to cost us X amount of millions. I can't do this on my own." I said, "If you're interested in doing it, I'll devote the time." We split it 50-50 equal, so it wasn't like he was funding it or I was putting in the money. And I said, let's make this a passion, and if we can't accomplish it, we'll both end up with a great collection for our kids someday. So it never was done for financial gain. It was very expensive. It was one of those things that, there was a great article written in the Dallas paper about this collection where in the late 60s, early 70s, Dan's father, Dan's told the story, he said, "My dad invested as a partner in the Chicago Bulls." And he said, back then, we had a losing team, and he said it was costing my dad and my family a lot of money every year. And every now and then, the other partners would call my dad and ask for money. And I never fully understood what my dad was going through until I partnered with Robert Casterline on buying this collection.
Oh, great. That's funny. I can see those late night texts.
Send money. Send money.
Hey Dan, I found a card. Send money. Yeah, exactly.
Right. And I told the story. My wife's still convinced I only have $40,000 into the whole collection. I had the mail carriers getting angry with me. The mail carriers actually knocked on our door and said, "Look, we're sending way too many pieces and packages to your house. Is there something going on?" It became obsessive compulsive, but we were able to finally accomplish it. Knock on wood,
Nice.
Wow. Unbelievable. Robert, what was the hardest card to obtain in the collection? And can you give us a little background on why was it so difficult?
Yeah, I read. To think about that, it's so difficult. I mean, it's every card is hard. To be honest with you, because every card, if it's at an auction, it's hard. You're bidding against other people that are equally passionate. If it's owned by a person who you're talking to, it's hard for them to part with it. It's hard for them to put a dollar amount. That first Sid Luckman, I paid, I think $20,000 or $25,000 for, but I knew the guy that owned it originally paid like $75,000 for it. That was a fight for old DC piece. So, like, I was buying things at a bargain at that point because I don't think the market was there yet. And so the first piece was difficult because it was a big financial commitment. And then the last piece I got, I think the 48 Nomalini PSA 8 Leaf was the hardest card to find. It really was one of those things that was just such a challenge. And when I finally purchased that, it was the last card that made the collection, the Pro Football Hall of Fame rookie card collection, every card PSA 8 or higher.
Wow. That is a hard card to find. What is that, a pop like 2 in PSA 8? Yeah,
and the other one I've never seen come on the market.
Yeah, ditto.
That's amazing.
Incredible.
Amazing.
It's interesting. I collect uncut sheets, and I've got a Series 1 uncut sheet of 48 Leaf, and seeing how they lay out on the sheet really lets you know why there's certain cards that are incredibly rare, and that Nomalini is probably one of the toughest. All the Series 2 ones are.
Yeah, I mean it's pretty wild. I mean it really is. It's and then we do collect. We bought a lot of the concepts. We have a ton of uncut sheets from the 30s and 40s, 50s. We have a lot. I mean unopened boxes. We probably have 50 to 100 unopened boxes from the 60s. Not many 60s, 70s, 80s. I mean we also bought a collection of every card ever produced from 1970 to like 2 years ago. And, a lot of those were just in folders, but we bought those for archives. There's, I do have a lot of, uniforms that were worn for the cards, the actual jerseys that were worn when the cards were being, the photos were being taken, which is crazy because a lot of the uniforms or jerseys they were wearing weren't even their numbers. They were just random jerseys thrown to these guys. So like, meeting a lot of the players over the years, I've gotten great stories and feedback. And I think that's where, like, even the Bowmans, the 48, I think the 48 Bowmans had like little gifts that you could send the wrappers in to get the gifts. I spent like 2 years finding all those little gifts. Little dogs and little shamrocks and little rings. I mean, just crazy historic stuff that I really spent a lot of time trying to add to the collection.
Incredible. Wow. It's fascinating, Robert, because I know you've got, a, no pun intended, Hall of Fame caliber football card collection. But just to hear you talk about the breadth of everything else that you have, uncut sheets to boxes to jerseys, that's incredible.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean the lid to the ice cream where you used to pull the lid off, and it was the Nagurski PSA 8. I mean, do you know how hard it is to find a lid to an ice cream container never used? I mean, like all the early star cards, and I just really went to historic. I always was thinking historic, pre 1900s. I love. I really was passionate about the history and putting something together that would tell a complete story more than just buying cards. To buy the most expensive cards. I mean, the two most expensive I ever bought was the Jim Brown 9 rookie and the Bart Starr 9 rookie. I mean, they were probably $500,000 those two cards together. So, and now it's to the point where I don't think I'm going to continue chasing expensive cards. I think I wanted the best examples of the highest, graded cards by the best players. And I've kind of gotten to the point now where unless something real special shows up, I don't feel like I have to chase it,
Wow.
Well, there's really not that much more you can chase. I mean, it's an incredible story of tying all the other peripheral items with the cards themselves, which make it so special. And I do appreciate what you said, though, to make it a historical collection and trace the history of what was available at that time, so on and so forth. For example, the trinkets and the 48 Bowman set, and I'm sure other, the inserts and all the other things that were available at the time. So that's amazing. It really is.
Yeah, like there's even a little kid's plastic helmet that a company came out with in 1949, and on the box are all the 1948 football cards from Leaf.
Right.
Like it's like all that stuff. Like people, I just always felt they needed to see it, and anything that had a card involved, and from what the Hall of Fame is exhibiting, there's probably twice as much things and cards that I haven't been able to exhibit. But the way they displayed them was wonderful, with the clear walls with the front and the back of the cards showing. And we spent a lot of time getting like the lowest possible light. We got lights that they use at the Smithsonian so that there would be no like fading or aging of the cards over the time. But I think the collection's coming down in August or September of this year, right after the induction ceremony.
Okay.
Wow. Curious, Robert, if you have any like fun stories to tell about assembling this. I mean, you don't put a collection like this together without some sort of fun story. Chasing somebody down in an airport, to meet them, to grab a card, something like that.
No, I mean it's not. It's I made a lot of good friends. I mean, I've talked to a lot of people. I've gotten their stories. With this collection, it was waiting for the phone call, waiting for the yes. But like in terms of like that, that funny story, I don't think so. I think more than anything, it's endearing because I met a lot of great people. I think I will tell you one thing though. I've never been I don't know what the word to use is, like ripped off. I've never sent money for a card to somebody and not gotten the card, or I've never had any kind of like shenanigans pulled by anybody. The one thing about this hobby that I've learned, which I didn't know this 10 years ago, it's a pretty admirable hobby of really good people. I do have a good story. I've always used my wife's eBay account to buy these cards. So some of the collectors that were selling me the cards were convinced that they were being bought by a Danielle Casterline. And some guys ended up calling my wife thinking she's a big football card collector. And they'd say, hey, are you excited about the card I sent? I saw you online. I looked you up. I can't believe you collect football cards. And she's like, look, I'm married, and it's my husband buying the cards, guys. Sorry. So that's probably the funny story, because a lot of these guys couldn't believe, good-looking girls collecting all these football cards, But I think that's the funniest story I got.
And I will add, us football card collectors are a pretty good bunch. We're pretty respectful of each other. You don't get a lot of those, the internet bravado, kind of thing.
Yep.
We're pretty honest. I've shipped, very expensive cards without receiving payment for it too. Yeah, and that is the beauty of it, is getting to know people, and those offline deals, where just somebody takes your word at it. It's just, I do love that about our hobby.
Yeah, and the owners of the auction houses are great. Mile High, he's great. Memory Lane, great. Love of the Game, great. The owners of these companies are great. They're passionate. They, I actually met a lot of them. I have driven to be. I spend a lot of time meeting big collectors and meeting a lot of the owners of the auction houses, more than like trying to hunt a card down. Like I just always felt that if they knew who I was, and they, some of them knew what I was accomplishing, and they gave me their word that they wouldn't put it out there. Some of them I really believe really wanted Dan and I to put this collection together. Once they heard my reasoning, they really got excited about it. And and there's always a couple haters out there. I mean, I've had people say, "Oh, it's a shallow collection," or they,
Right.
Articles have come out where it's like, the most valuable, or it's every highest graded card in history, and then people write in and say, oh, it's not, and there's always going to be that, but it really was done for a genuine purpose, and hopefully it could end up at a museum or could end up at the Hall of Fame, where I like when people look at a card and they all have a story. Like when, I wasn't at the, a 68 Super Bowl, but there's somebody looking at one of those cards and they're talking about the game when they were there with their father. It really is a history of the game. And to see these players in their prime, in their youth, it's pretty amazing. And the stories they tell me when they point at their card or they hold their card up with me, and I've gotten a few of them, they're real special. So yeah, it's a great bunch of collectors, and it's a great hobby, and I have nothing but praise for the hobby as a whole.
Must have been baseball card collectors that were giving you grief. Us football guys don't do that.
Hey, look, they have a lot more money. They're I don't know. Those guys are selling a lot more widgets to pay for those baseball cards. But I'm learning that football cards are getting pretty expensive too. I every now and then I try to pick one up, and I'm like, wow, that's 3 times what I wanted to pay for it. But the good thing about our collection too is people know these cards are off the market. I mean, I have 35 or 36 PSA 8 Namath rookie cards now.
Wow.
But my first ones I was buying for they were $6,500 a piece when I started buying them.
Wow.
So that's your hoard card? That's the card that you hoard, is the Namath?
Yeah, or a horror car, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, that's the one I go after. I just love the card. I love the tall boys, and
no wonder they're $20,000 now, Robert. That's you.
Yeah, they got up to 40,000. I backed off at about 25, and then I waited till they settled down. And listen. There's only like 75 of them, and do you know how hard it is for those cards to be centered, and how hard it was for those cards to survive because of the size of them? There's also like that psychological thing about them. They're pretty special cards for a lot of different reasons.
Without a doubt.
So that's the first cards that I ever opened when I was a kid, 7 years old. It was a 65 Topps, and I still have my Namath rookie from when I opened it back in '65, and that's going down with me when I go.
See?
Because
how did I know to pick that? That's great.
It's it's my memory as a childhood. My childhood memory is so vivid. Buying those packs and opening them and so on and so forth. I'll never forget
and you heard the story
of
Joe with that when he took that card, that photo for that card, right?
No.
Letterman had him. We have it at the Hall of Fame, a video where he's on Letterman, and Letterman pulls out that card.
Yeah.
And and he was in the hospital when they took that card.
Right.
And he leaned up against the wall because he couldn't stand.
Yep.
And I think the photographer said, "Joe, the show must go on." that's when they took that picture.
Yep.
Incredible! I didn't know that. Wow.
He definitely didn't have a smiling face on that card as compared to other cards that he was.
He said he was in pure pain.
Wow. The other question I have, because the collection is so big, it has to be difficult to store and transport. Are there any tips you can offer individuals as far as shipping or storing a collection of that size? Giving it, parallel it to people who have, let's say, 30% of what you have. They're still having a tough time shipping it or storing it, so on and so forth. Any tips or any ideas on that?
Well, I live in Naples, Florida year-round, so the hurricane thing is a real problem. It was a real thing. I mean, we got lucky because, number one, I drove the collection up from Florida to Canton. Had it insured for a lot of money, prayed a lot. But, temperature control is a little bit important. Once they're in the cases, they become a lot more protected, which is really good. And, plexiglass as a whole is ultraviolet protected. People don't realize that. There's about 80% protection on it. A lot of people, when they insure their collection through a separate policy because it's not covered under your homeowner's insurance, they get a traveling policy. So the cards are insured if you ship them up to X amount. I think mine's like $50,000. I could, ship any card anywhere up to $50,000, and as long as I don't send it certain ways, because they don't even want you, insurance agents don't even want you to ship it FedEx if possible. But how do you not ship cards FedEx? And the U.S. postal system is usually not as good, in my opinion. So I think a lot of it's a sad leap of faith, and I think all you can do is insure them and hope for the best. I think that's really my advice to collectors. And for storing them, I mean, I never liked safe deposit boxes because I never liked having them away from me. I bought a bunch of Century fireproof cases, and you can't obsess over the value of them. It could drive you crazy, believe it or not. It could drive you crazy. So insure them, enjoy them, and hope for the best.
Just the size of it. I mean, at one point, I had the number 1 Hall of Fame rookie card set, and I had a 6-foot-tall fire safe filled with the cards, and then there was overflow. I mean, so just I know just the breadth of that collection, just how much it weighs, how hard it is to transport. I mean, it's tough.
Yeah, once again, I drove everything. The Hall of Fame stored everything for us in their fireproof rooms. They have the archives at the Hall of Fame. So that was all part of our agreement. Plus, I have so many I collect sideline jackets from the 1940s and 50s, but worn by the players. If you knew the depth of what I collect, we have the first documents when the AFL was first set up. I have the earliest known football rule book. Even the Hall of Fame didn't know it existed. So, Walter Camp, there's so many things we have in the collection that isn't even out there yet. But, in time it will be. And it got to the point where I was just afraid it wasn't the value. If something happened to it, God forbid, and I got the value out of it, that would have been one thing. But it would have been a disaster for future generations to seeing these things.
Right. Yeah, lost.
Right. Yeah, so that was my main thing.
Curious, other than the obvious 1977 top Steve Largent rookie card, what's your favorite card in the collection?
Listen, for the size of Largent, it's amazing he got that far, that short little guy. But he tells a good story. He tells a good story, and I actually like hearing him speak, believe it or not.
Yeah, ditto.
The Nomalini probably because it was the last one. When you complete something and you have a goal, 95% of people can never accomplish goals for a lot of different reasons, and it was like a big weight off my shoulder. And it was like once I clicked it into PSA, and I knew we had a collection that was at that point the highest, collection or the number 1 collection. It was like such joy. And if somebody eventually merges 5 collections and has a bigger collection someday and they want to put their name up there, I'd be just as excited for them. It never was about me or us or proving anything. It was ultimately became the sense of accomplishment.
Good for you. That's such a classy answer. I really like that, Robert.
No, thank you. That was the truth.
Well, I think because of the breadth of the collection and the depth of it and the historical value of it, I think anybody putting it together, and from what you've been talking about today and what I've read on it, you're doing it for the love of the history of the game and preserving the history of the game. Something I've always been very big on. That if we don't preserve the game, the history of the game, the memorabilia of the game, we've lost everything. And again, we can't be an NFL that started in 1970. Our NFL started in 1921, whether anybody wants to believe it or not. And you have to incorporate the AFL, and you have to take things from the USFL and the WFL also, that type of situation. So I think what you did was just unbelievable. I'm literally speechless to even ask.
No, and I wish I could share it with more people. I still think the Pottsville Maroons got robbed of the championship.
Oh yeah.
I have Blood McNally. When Blood McNally retired, or when he went to Green Bay from the Maroons, they gave him a key fob in the shape of a football carved out of anthracite coal that is engraved with his name and his number. And I found that at an obscure auction years ago. And, I love the Pottsville Maroons. Like, I love the history. I love the Patch Brother photographs of all the colleges. I mean, that's the one thing. Like, I don't spend a lot of time talking to people about the collection or my love of the game, but I've even offered some of the collectors, and we know who they are, the people with the big collections from, the early 1900s, the really rare, obscure cards. I'm even hoping someday they come to us to buy them so that we can merge them into this collection so we could expand the history of the game. I think that's like the one thing is I've studied it, I've learned it, I'm living it, and I at the end of the day, we can't take it with us. And and if it's about money, everybody could figure that out. I'd love to see the Hall of Fame have a whole section of the archives of the cards, the history, things that are important to the game based on what us collectors put together and exhibited for generations to see it. And, and that's really where I came from and where I'm going with it. And ultimately, when people talk to me, when they hear, my reasoning and my theories and my excitement, hopefully, like you said, you leave with a better understanding of why I did what I did and why Dan did what he did.
Well, that's very true, and very true. And the way you explained it, I mean, it was so it's so logical. It makes all the sense in the world, and I give you guys all the credit for doing what you did. I mean, it was an amazing undertaking to try to complete something like that. I mean, it's, like I said, it's the best collection ever assembled in our hobby, and I've been in the hobby a long time, and it just amazes me. I'm going to put you on the spot, Robert, for a second, and I want you to give our audience any advice for a beginning collector of football cards. I always ask all our guests that question, and very interested to hear what you say about that.
I say don't buy volume. I always like the idea, like if try to find the one thing you're passionate about, whether it's a player or a team. Buy a little bit better of a card than you can afford. That's always my thing. If you want to spend $10 on a card or $1,000 on a card, spend $12 or $1,100 on a card. Buy a little bit better. Buy the highest grade you can afford, and because there is a value to it. They're expensive. They're big commitments to people. And they are investments now. We need to view them as investments, whether the old time collectors like it or not. And you may not be buying a Bart Starr rookie card, but his second year card at a PSA 7 is a darn good value, or a PSA 8. There's things out there to kind of like decide where you want to go with it. And I'd rather see somebody buy one great card than 400 okay cards. The volume isn't always what it's cracked up to be.
Good point. Very good point. Early on in my collection, I had a guy who ended up becoming a dear friend who knew I was putting together a good Hall of Fame set, called me and he's like, you just bought a PSA 4 48 leaf Steve Van Buren. What are you doing? And I'm like, well, I wanted to fill the spot. And he's like, don't. Just be patient. You're splashing it around. I know what you're doing. It was some of the best advice I got.
He's right.
And that was the beginning of just that camaraderie in the hobby for me, where it's just somebody took the time to do that. I'm curious, Robert. I mean, you mentioned it sounds like you did a lot of the buying and hunting and gathering. I mean, did Dan Hunt ever scour eBay or scour auction houses? Were you guys looking at these things together, or did you do most of the buying?
I did all the buying. We just didn't want to cloud it. Like he didn't, it's real particular because he kind of he knew the whole collection as we would acquire it, because he and I would talk about more we'd go on PSA and we'd look at where we were, and he kind of knew what we needed or what we didn't need. When he kind of left it up to me, which was great. A lot of the little needs he let me handle, but when a big purchase came, we bought the PSA 9 Jim Thorpe. it was a big commitment. I had to call him and say, look, we're going to go after this thing, and where do you want to stop? And where, it was more like once things started getting towards the end, it started getting real serious and real expensive.
Yeah.
And I needed a Bronco Nagurski 8 for my Chickle set, or Chickley set. Everybody pronounced it Chickle set. But then I also needed a Nagurski 8 for my Hall of Fame set, because the one thing I didn't do is I didn't double up the cards. Cards in the Hall of Fame set are not the cards in the 35 set, if that makes sense. So
Yep.
I had to duplicate. So that's why we have 2 Nagurski 8s, not because we really wanted to spend that kind of money, but because we felt we needed to have a perfect collection.
So you mentioned, I would imagine, the Hunt name doubles the price when Dan Hunt comes looking for a card. So that makes sense.
It not only doubles it, it makes people say they don't want to sell it. That's what we were afraid of, and then honestly, there were a few cards I was going after that the owners of them told me they were actually contacted by other football team owners that were interested in buying the cards.
Oh, fascinating.
Wow.
So just like the guy that owns the Diamondbacks, other people that own sports teams are becoming collectors now in cards, especially of their early team, their team players. So you had to make a decision really quick, and when someone put a price on a card, you had to be willing to jump on it. And he kind of gave me carte blanche on most everything. Probably would have on everything, but I always respect him and his family, and his, that I would call him and be like, Dan, this is the price. Are we good with it? And I think he always appreciated that respect too.
That's cool. You mentioned you're still looking.
Of course.
You've got one of the nicest Hall of Fame sets put together, and but you said you're still looking every once in a while. What is your white whale? What are you looking for?
I kind of got all my whales. I would have, would I buy the Nagurski 9 if the owner didn't put a crazy price on it? Maybe, because I'm still a realistic person. Like, I think my whale, it just hasn't been presented to me. You know what I mean? Like, it's almost like a whale captain. You don't know what whale you're going to get until the whale shows up. So I never chased particular cards because I felt like that was like a no-win situation. I know Frank Gifford just got popped a 10 for his rookie card, which is incredible to me.
Wow.
And then the price that got offered just was out of reach with what I would have considered. But I also like when things go to auction because it's a fairer playing field than when I buy privately. So, I don't know what I'm looking for until it shows. And I would always consider upgrading if something good came about.
Interesting.
Yeah, not
and
a
that's
perfect
a good point
answer.
about auction. Yeah, no, it's good. It's yours. I like it. And you mentioned, I'm sorry, I just have some, as you were speaking, I was jotting down questions I had. I could talk to you for an hour, Robert. You mentioned you had an uncut sheet from the 1930s. There is one. Yeah,
no,
one main
I'm sorry. It's
set.
40, 45, or 48's my earliest one. I don't have a 30. I don't have a 30 sheet. I don't have a Chickle sheet. I've never even seen a Chickle sheet. Have you?
No, that's my white whale.
Yeah, I don't think.
Yeah.
I think my earliest one is a 48 leaf, and then I have the Bowman sheets, a whole bunch of those. I think that's where it starts, and then I might have a couple of sheets of like some of the obscure like card companies, like just like not Star, but one of the other ones. I have a few like what is it? I might have a small sheet of a couple of the early candy companies from the 30s. I might. I'd have to go back and check. I can't remember. Yeah. Isn't it Pete?
Star Player candy?
Yeah, I think Pete Candies or something. PEET.
Right.
I might have a sheet of like 4 or 5 of those uncut.
Wow.
That's amazing. Those are hard to store. I've really become a uncut sheet collector, but they are a bear to store.
Pain in the neck. You got wobbly plastic sheets all over the place.
Indeed. Yeah, indeed. So,
Unbelievable.
I'm curious. I one last. Oh, I'm sorry. I have one last question if you have time, Bob.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you visit chat rooms or chat boards or if you're aware. there's kind of a scandal going through the hobby right now about card trimming, card doctoring.
Yeah.
Yeah, how familiar are you with that, and how much, like, do you read hobby chat boards or anything like that?
I got on there and I got in an argument with the guy, and he like busted me about collecting the cards, and I found myself getting defensive, and I was like, okay, this isn't healthy for me. I'm only 48, but I don't need to be getting all worked up over this stuff, So I kind of got off of them. I have pretty good advice for collectors on that, and I have a pretty decent opinion, and I equate it to collecting artwork. Nobody fakes or doctors things that are less expensive. Like if you're gonna make a fake painting, you're gonna make a Rothko painting. You're not gonna make a lesser painting. I think, in my opinion, the majority of the doctor cards are baseball cards because that's where the value is. It's worth them to be thieves and be deceptive and be criminals on it, because if you're going to go to jail or you're going to get found out, you're going to do it on an expensive Mickey Mantle card as opposed to a freaking 48 Luckman card. Like I would almost guarantee, like, the football hobby hasn't been as affected as the baseball card hobby. Now, will that change as they become, more expensive? Maybe. But I think baseball cards have a real problem with that because the values have just gotten so high. And there's a couple masters out there in what they were doing from what I heard. But I still think we're protected. I think that's going to be an issue for PSA or the grading companies to really figure out, because that's where the buck stops, in my opinion. When I buy a card, and none of the cards I ever put in this collection, I ever got holstered myself. So I've never sent cards into PSA to be graded. I always depended on them to grade a card that I was purchasing. So if they're putting their label on it, their name on it, their reputation on it, and they tell me it's a PSA 9 and it turns out to be a fake, they should have insurance. They need to. That's why we pay them. If I pay somebody for a service that they're not providing properly, they're liable to me. And I really think they're going to have to come to terms with that. And with, you could almost magnify something to find out when the inks were done. So I think there's 10 different graders. I think they need people to take. I think you really need, based on the value of the cards and what the cards are, they're going to have to really make sure they have a more professional thing out there. Not that they don't. I love the guys at PSA. I'm not putting them under the scope either. I'm just saying, the minute they chose to do that profession, then they became liable to the whole industry, in my opinion.
Yep, I agree with that. I agree with that. Well, we're almost out of time, Robert. I thank you so much for being on. I'm literally speechless hearing this show tonight. Just really amazing. You have an incredible collection, and I'll put you on the spot. Do we have a line on Chiefs tickets by any chance, since we know you now, or
I mean, I've been to 18. Listen, the first painting I sold to Dan, I sold to him for cost. He wanted an expensive painting. His family had to make sure he was going to get it. He found it through another dealer a lot more expensive, and I told him, look, I'll sell it to you for exactly what I'm paying, but I want Super Bowl tickets for the rest of my life. I've been to 18 Super Bowls, guys.
Holy,
that's great.
And there was a 5-year, probably a 7-8 year period where I really wasn't as friendly with Dan. And every year, 2 weeks before the Super Bowl, he would call me and say, "Where do you want your tickets, Robert?"
Good on him, man. I like that.
I got 400 stories for you, but I know you guys got to go. It was an honor for me to be on the show tonight. I thank you. Yeah. Any collectors out there? My email is my name at AOL.com. You can see how old I am, Robert Casterline at AOL.com. Any collectors want advice, they want to email me, they want opinions. It takes me a little while to get back to them because I'm super busy, but I do reach back out to people that ask me questions. I feel like it's my way of giving back to the hobby.
Oh, that's great. That's so great.
Amazing, Robert.
That.
It has been a
so
privilege, an honor to have you on.
You're welcome, guys. Have a
Thank
great
you.
night. Thanks again.
All right, you too. Take
Bye-bye.
care. Joe, we're
Bob.
literally almost out of time. I'm going to hand off to you. Like I said, I'm literally speechless tonight listening to him talk about the collection. It just blew me away.
Classy.
To say the least.
Classy.
Unbelievable.
The old Simon Sinek, start with why. Start with the why. We heard his why, and I'm very pleased to know that somebody's just as passionate about the hobby like that, not just assembling stuff, but truly passionate about the hobby and its history.
And, the one thing that sticks out in my mind when he says, to accomplish a goal, and he felt relieved. And I found it very interesting. The last cards from my run were the high numbers from the 48 leaf set. And my 48 leaf set is from poor condition to near mint. It's every which way. And I really never bothered upgrading it or anything like that. But I couldn't tell you, when I finished that last card and I put it in my 9-pack, I just said, wow, this was a nice run. This was really a nice run. But unfortunately, in my case, I didn't know what else I wanted to do, so I kind of just slowed down from that point on. You know what I mean? And that was about 7 years ago. But amazing. Yeah. What an amazing. All right, we're almost out of time. 30 seconds, Joe. Final thoughts.
Just classy. Just hearing the breadth of his collection, because I've always pinned him as a football card collector, but to find out just the breadth of his collection was impressive. Yeah,
I never realized he had all the other peripheral items in the collection, and it blows me away to hear about it. All right, we'll be back in July with a couple of shows. Check out our website, gridirongreatsmagazine.com. If you're not a subscriber, back issues are available. Joe, I won't see you for a while because you won't be at the National, but we'll be in touch. And I thank everybody for listening. Good night.
Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, a.k.a. the Football History Dude, and I wanted to thank you for stopping by to listen to another episode here on the Sports History Network. Our podcasters are passionate about uncovering and sharing sports stories from yesteryear. And if you didn't know it already, we have over 30 shows across the network covering all sorts of sports history topics. In fact, here's a glimpse into one of our awesome podcasts here on the network.
Each week, the official Football Learning Academy podcast will take you deep into the history of pro football through interviews with players, coaches, or administrators in the NFL, as well as interviews with Pro Football Hall of Fame selectors, authors, and historians. You'll learn how the game evolved and important moments that shaped the sport into what it is today. And don't miss the Pro Football History Nugget of the Week. Listen to the official Football Learning Academy podcast on the Sports History Network.
How about that? I bet you're super hyped to go listen to that new podcast, right? Well, to learn about this show and all the other podcasts on the network, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com/podcast. Again, that's sportshistorynetwork.com/podcast. Head over there today to find your next favorite sports history podcast.